It's nice that it happens that the dates of the next 2 weeks have us focusing on the rise of David this week and his decline next week. We finish 1 Samuel and start 2 Samuel this week, so we see the end of the reign of King Saul and the inauguration of David's kingdom. And we see David at the height of his grandeur. On Monday, we read a delightful story that shows something of the appeal and character of David as he deals with Abigail, who becomes his second wife. I preached about her on November 15th, so if you want to hear more about her, go to our YouTube channel, find the service from November 15th, 2020, and listen to the sermon. David's loyalty and honesty are a marked contrast to the collapse of King Saul. In his desire to please the Lord, Saul had done away with mediums in the land, but when he wanted the guidance of God, he went to a medium. She's remembered as the Witch of Endor, and I always think of her when I watch Return of the Jedi. Endor is a town southwest of the Sea of Galilee, not just a moon around which the second Death Star is orbiting. Anyway, the medium conjures up the ghost of the prophet Samuel, who predicts Saul's death. But before that happens, there is a curious story about David's defection to a Philistine monarch. Ever since David slew Goliath, he's been a fierce enemy to the Philistines, but with Saul constantly pursuing him, he sought refuge under a Philistine king named Achish. Achish gave David the town of Ziklag to live in, and David and his men would go out and raid against Amalekites and other enemies of Israel, and then he would lie to Achish and tell him he had raided Israelite towns. So he convinced Achish that he had changed loyalties, and Achish trusted him. A crisis threatened when Achish summoned David to fight with him against Israel. David obeyed and went with the Philistines, but the Philistine commanders didn't trust him and convinced Achish to send him home. So David appears to be clever and lucky, but he's also something of a sneak. Well, so much more happens. Saul and Jonathan are killed, and David becomes king of Judah, while Saul's son Ishbaal becomes king of Israel. The civil war between the two is finally resolved when Ishbaal is assassinated, and David reunites Saul's kingdom and makes his capital at Jerusalem. And this week's reading ends with David at the height of his power. Let me finish by calling attention to 3 moments that help to establish David firmly in our minds as a charismatic and appealing figure. The first is after he learned of the death of Saul and Jonathan. He wrote a beautiful song lamenting their death. Jonathan, remember, was his closest friend, and David sang, "Your love to me was wonderful, passing the love of women." The second moment is when David had the Ark of the Covenant brought to Jerusalem, and David, filled with joy, danced energetically before the Ark, stripped down to his skivvies. And the third picture is when he did something concrete to keep his promise to Jonathan to be kind. You know that traditional practice is to kill all the surviving members of your rival's family, so you would expect David to kill all the descendants of Saul. Instead, he found Jonathan's son Mephibosheth and brought him to Jerusalem to eat at his table. He treated him as one of his own. Perhaps Abraham Lincoln thought of him when he said, "Do not I destroy my enemies when I make them my friends?"